Why I'm Right, Part 2. All right, so I'm going to actually read this guy now. I just want to give the context to all that happened, lost the girl, but proved to myself that I could love. Didn't finish the project, but proved to myself. That's what it is. I do these things to prove something to myself, feeling like I never really felt like it was my time to break anyways. I only until after I made money did I feel, all right, now I've rounded out my blind spots and I have a voice to say, but I was always cautious about speaking up or leading without really know because I'm so do everything with all of my effort and idealistic that if I have any doubts or a sizable amount of doubts, you can't be 100%. I explore those before I. So that's what it is. There's a two-sided thing to it. Very idealistic and firm in my beliefs, but those are hard earned, and it's because I really think about stuff too. So the citizens audit thing, I knew it was half baked from the beginning. But I'd rather be doing that than building the insurance company. So in a way, it was a jumping out of the insurance company, and then that's where some people might say, well, you're just exhibiting an inability to commit and I guess that's a story that they tell themselves. But as I told a friend of mine who told me, if you keep running, you're always going to be running. And I told him, I think I'm running towards something, not away from something. I'm trying to figure out this voice, this writing voice, and this political voice. And all of this, I'm growing. If I look back on my life, and that's why I put in joyful years, the years are filled with creations. I've created stuff with these years. And this year, in these videos, this is something. I'm still not sure what it is or how I'm going to incorporate it in a larger work. But it has a structure, and there's a point, and I'm learning. If I look back on the year or even the months, and I feel like I've grown my view and I've learned, and now like if I put on a little bit of muscle, my body's getting bigger, that's enough for me. And like with this girl, like nothing happened, but it might. And if it doesn't, it reminded me that I am attractive though, or that like I do, I am decent with a female company. Like we did, you don't have to, always, I said, you don't have to consummate every relationship. The foot doesn't have to step on everything. It has an arch for a reason. Some things cannot be touched. Um, it makes it more special when it happens. But yeah, I guess I don't compromise myself willingly, and that's what I'm recognizing that here. So I'm back at my folks' house, that sanctuary, which only lasts so long. They won't be here forever. It's nice that I'm enjoying it now again. This seems to be my pattern. I'm recognizing a pattern in life. When I'm down and out, they've never failed me in their love for me, and that's a really good example of selfless love, despite our arguments and our differences. I don't sit here and argue them about politics. Like even this morning, when I hear the stupid little videos they watch, all these little propaganda videos, everyone's trying to incite the other side. I just point out how it sounds a lot like they're just trying to incite emotions. And then usually we end up talking about my mom's childhood or other stuff, but we don't talk too much about. I point out their addiction to their phones, that they seem to be on it a bunch. I try to but I'm learning the balance, and that's what family and friends do. Just living with each other, there's more love than arguments. We make breakfast for each other. We talk in the mornings, the evenings when they come home. I watch their silly shows. I tell them I don't really like Hawaii Five-O or what is the other one they watch? The CSI shows. But Blue Bloods is alright. Blue Bloods is pretty good writing. I didn't think I would like that Wahlberg kid, but he seems cool. Kid, right? He's probably my age or older. Donnie Wahlberg or whatever. But no, he's probably older. But yeah, no, I thought it was a silly show. It is, the plot devices are very much top down, respect authority, respect bureaucracy. Their names are Reagan, come on. But Tom Selleck seems like a cool dude in real life as well. Yeah, it doesn't have to be left or right. He owns a farm, and he has his gravitas that comes from someone who is physically active and has firm principles. And those are the people that I like in life, regardless of whether you agree with them politically or not, because they might be covering your blind spots. You might be covering theirs. He was a leader of the NRA, but then I think he stepped down, but he seems like a principled person. And that's someone that you can have a discussion with. Anyways, so yeah, Blue Bloods, all the shows I watch. But like when they go and they arrest someone on a little drug possession thing, I'm like, you guys, you're not helping the cause by all these cop shows. We have to. Would society fall apart if we didn't have so many cop shows? Really, we need to be indoctrinated to respect authority so much, or maybe we I don't know. There's something in there that I don't like, but it would take more time to unpack. All right, so we're going to finish this. I don't know how long this is going to take, so I'm going to stick to this unless distraction. I want to do a multiple hour video for this one. But this is important. At home, thinking, all right, now my curiosity has turned from California and the political spectrum to living on the beach, reading about Jack London and how he broke, and then also his ideals, and recognizing a kindred soul while I'm over here just living out of my car being a bum, and he was a bum for a little bit. So I'm recognizing this manic artist desire to get their voice out there. And then I get home and I'm like, all right, let me explore my brain a little bit. And I turn inward a little bit. So as I grew older, I began to earn bad grades in the education system. This led in middle school and high to invitations for academic pentathlon and decathlon teams, which sought out bright students with poor records. That was a general pattern that would follow during those high school years. Intelligence paired with an unwillingness to perform. However, throughout this time, I did, in a sense, engage in intellectual activities. To begin with, there was the school library, which I visited often, and with much excitement. Oh, I already read this stuff. Apart from assignments, I read paperback things which are filled with what I now recognize as revolutionary concepts. Yeah, this is why I brought up Randall. At 16, I digested the autobiography of Malcolm X as told by the good Alex Haley in about a week and recognized a kindred soul. Soon after, I helped to organize an underground newspaper. Legal-sized sheets, photocopied on both sides, and folded in my parents' insurance agency. These issues were the most inflammatory burlesque stuff you can imagine, from tips on how to find free pornography on the nascent internet to opinion pieces on the validity of Kwanzaa and the necessity of male genital grooming. But side by side with all this, I was carrying out a rebellious exercise of a quite different kind. This was the making up of a personal moral code for myself, a sort of rule book existing only in the mind. I believe this is a common habit of children and adolescents. As a very small child, I used to intervene in the shouting matches of my parents and place myself as arbiter of family feuds. But quite soon my family ceased to be merely my household and became more and more the social group in which I was engaged and those I observed. On many occasions, my friends would have to suffer this kind of unsolicited reasoning. Your mom just wants you to do well in school. You want her to leave you alone. Perhaps if you negotiated reasonable goals with her, including rewards for turning your grades around, you wouldn't have these arguments and be grounded all the time. It doesn't do any good to disrespect her. In just the same way, you're not motivated by her threats. You both want the same thing. You just have to figure out how to communicate your desires efficiently, etc., etc. This meddlesome habit continued until I was about 27, right through my non-activist years. So I guess I was at 27 at this time. Yeah, I just turned my birthday. I think I had my birthday. When did I have my birthday? Did I have my birthday, 27th birthday, on those beaches in San Francisco, reading Jack London, sleeping out of my car? Because I was doing that for a good couple weeks, maybe a month, until I tapped out and went home. I called my mom, all right, I give up on this project. I need some comfort. And then after that, I went to, well, we won't get too ahead. But yeah, and within a couple years, I did the Occupy Wall Street thing. Crazy. We're catching up. We're almost at the present. Although I had to reflect, and did reflect, on my own hypocrisy, I seemed to be pursuing this peacemaking effort with almost against my will, under a kind of compulsion from the outside. This moralizing must, I suppose, have reflected the Christian ethic of the non-denominational family church I attended since birth, but so far as I remember, it always had the same pragmatic rationality. When I was about 18, I was suddenly discovered by an army recruiter, an alumni from my high school and fellow wrestler. The scores for my SATs, math 710, verbal 720, which now seem wonderful in a quaint way, did not seem to me so very wonderful at the time, and the continuation of formal schooling was a horrible prospect. As for the need to rebel, I was rejecting the easy college path. I chose to join the good fight and earn my rank among those who by serving afforded us civilians the freedom we take for granted. So that was my line I always used. Look, I chose to be in the army because some of us serve to afford the rest of us the freedom we take for granted. It was an asshole statement, but there's some truth to that. If there's going to be people who serve, I want to be among them. Until I got in, I was like, fuck this. But I think in a more noble era, with things not as fucked up from the top down culturally, I would willingly and proudly serve out an enlistment. But there's little indications that it reeked, and it sounds arrogant of me to say that I noticed those just from my AIT, just from the little bit. But I think my instincts have been proven correct a lot of times in life. That's what the thing is. I almost stayed in still. I almost was that Army diver. I looked up that MOS and I was about to ask for a transfer. And I think they would have done it too. But my vision, I would have had to get it LASIK, and that was just one extra thing that I was like, I'm not sure if. But if I was a little bit, I was like probably 45% stay in, 55 get out. If I was a little bit over 50%, if my folks had said, I asked them, do you mind if I get out? And they're like, come home. My mom never wanted me again in the first place. That's how much respect I give my folks before big life decisions. So, but I also have to recognize their blind spots. But yeah, if my dad was like, you know what, I don't know. He's the guy who told me in high school, if you don't like high school, don't do it. So they were, for all of the things we disagree about, they were very hands off and allowed me the space to, like, sometimes I tell them, this is the kid you raised. And that's why I tell them, you can call me David, you can call me whatever you want. There's a mutual respect that goes back and forth, but it's earned. That's what relationships are. When I talk to my brother or other people about their family, it's earned with time. You have to spend time with them. You can't just come back after 5-10 years, act like you know people. You're related, but these couple months out of anything, even if no money comes from it, and this is just another crazy abandoned writing project, I'm investing time with them while they're still here with me on this earth. And that's more important than it, depending on your values. My values, our family, is more important than anything. So regardless of my opinions and everything else, we're having our breakfasts and dinners and our silly little conversations and our arguments. I stick up for my pops. I tell moms, there's another man in the house, now you can't, we're going to team up on you, you succubus. And then we call her a banshee, and we're just joking, but she's a ball buster. And that's what I told one of my friends when I was leaving her place. She was trying to give me grief, and I told her, I'm not fucking you. I don't gotta be. If we have arguments, I'm gonna come at you just like you're coming at me. I'm gonna be very direct. And the boyfriend was trying to calm me down, and I was like, no, man, you got to be nice to her because you guys share a bed. I get that. He's a happy wife, happy life. But that's my friend. You're not giving me anything. This is mutual respect right here. Don't use that fucking ball busters is a way that, like, guys can be assholes and misogynistic, but there's this opposite thing that women can be, where they just kind of dig at a guy in a certain way. And when I recognize that spirit, it depends. Sometimes it's deserved. If I'm being an ass, a woman can cut you down in certain ways that a man can't, and point out certain insecurities or certain, but when I feel it's undeserved, or when she's throwing around her feminine energy, I'm like, no, where do we? I'm not, because anyways, that's something you would have to know. When you're having in a sexual relationship with someone, there's certain buttons they can push because of that intimacy. Probably defensive, right? So it is clear what kind of, I've noticed that the girls with the sharpest claws are the small little ones, the ones who are most vulnerable. Like my friend, she's the one who's now on the path to recovery. She grew up in a large family. She's a tiny little, she's not the youngest, but she needed to develop these tools, which when I see them come out, try to just let her be aware of it, so that way she's not using them unjustified. But she said that to me once when we were doing our back and forth and I was trying to be with her. She was like, we can both cut each other really deep. Like, you have a way of saying things that you can cut to people's to souls. If you're good with words, you can hurt someone really efficiently. And she said, let's not do that to each other. And that's why I keep her in my life, because she's covered so many blind spots for me, so many male blind spots. Not by telling me that's not how you approach a woman, but just by not being not reciprocating when I approach her like that. But the fact that we always come back together, and yeah, that's what, like, some of your friends, it's really interesting making friends in life. Sometimes it doesn't come from smiling, happy, holding hands. Sometimes it comes from antagonism. But then some of us want those people next to us because we want ride or die friends. We want strong spirits. We're attracted to those. So if we could make our peace eventually, I would email her. I would tell her, I know we're going to be friends in our 50s and our 60s. I didn't have much hope for us when we were young. So it's cool that we're getting our 30s now. But I told her I know we're going to stick together because I haven't met anyone that wild. She is, when she wants to be bad, she can be very bad. And now I'm glad she's using her powers for good, or at least to make money and stabilize her life. I'll tell her, I just told her last night I'm proud of her and I brag about her to my parents all the time. Told her about my date. And the continuation of formal schooling was a horrible prospect. I should ask her some advice, huh? I should send her a screenshot and be like, was this too much? Am I being myself again? But in a bad way, too much myself. As for the need to rebel, I was rejecting the easy college path. I chose to join the good fight and earn my rank among those who, by serving, afforded us civilians the freedom we take for granted. So it is clear what kind of life I wanted to live, insofar as I could be said to have sense of purpose at the time. I wanted to do the right thing while challenging myself physically and mentally among fellow adventurers and roughneck patriots, and also have those Rambo moments in which masculinity is defined by one's ability to survive the awesome wilderness. And in fact, my first action upon separating from the military was to hike into the Big Sur wilderness to smoke marijuana for the first time and commune with the awesome astride a redwood log floating down a glittering river. So this isn't my writing. These are my words, but this is how much syntax matters. And this, as a writer, I try to do things for multiple reasons, and that's how you keep from being a megalomaniac, is that, yeah, there's the ego, why I'm right, and there's like California running for governor, but I also have this girl, and we're working on a relationship and figuring out if we should stay with each other. And then she went back to New York, and I'm like, all right, you're ride or die to the point. But everyone has a point. Just because you found someone's breaking point doesn't make you any special. You have a breaking point too, I do, so can't hold that against her. But there's some ways I acted disrespectfully towards her too. And also we were on her mom's dime. She was giving us most of the money. But yeah, so I'm doing this, but it's that interviewing people, which I feel is a part of who I want to be, get out there and talk to people about civics. So I had that practice, going to the governor's, the Capitol, and taking away the mystique just by walking around and seeing that there's some dumbasses in here and there's some silliness going on overtly. It just gave me a lot more confidence in my political beliefs, walking out into the real world and practicing them. Just like she gave me confidence in my romantic beliefs. That, all right, I was onto something about how to treat women and I didn't keep her, but I let her go. I feel like it was catch and release. That, like, I'm back on my grind. I went to New York, went through that phase, but like this was my original grind. And this, I'm trying to figure, so that now I'm articulating, where did this start, this grind? But as I'm writing this, I'm listening to it. This isn't how I write. This is, if I do have a style that I've developed over stuff I've tried to write, and I'm still trying to figure that out. This is all borrowed style. So it's cool because they're my words and my autobiography, but it's like we're reading George Orwell. This is his syntax structure. So just regardless of the autobiographical take and regardless of the political take, the art of writing, this is good practice, and I would recommend it to anyone. Take someone's writing and just rewrite it as your own words, but try to keep as much of the syntax. And then you get this cool little, and that's why I could write one of these, a chapter a day. And then I forgot why I stopped doing this. If you just the manic energy, and then it burns out. You're like, all right, on to the next thing. I guess that was a fun exercise. Everything's a fun exercise. So. I give all this background information because I do not think one can assess a person's motives without knowing something of his earlier development. His constitution will be in part determined by the environment he lives in. This is most true in a patronizing, coercive country like our own. But before he ever begins to liberate his mind, he will have acquired an emotional attitude from which he will never completely escape. It is his responsibility, no doubt, to practice self-reflection and avoid getting stuck with false assumptions or with some perverse prejudice. But if he escapes from his earlier influences altogether, he will have killed his impulse towards justice. Putting aside the drive to live and examine life, I think there are 4 great motives for social justice, at any rate for the social crusader. They exist I'm only taking these terms because he had terms, I think, the writer. And so I was just looking for the quick analogies, the quick stuff that it had to have enough weight to actually carry through the rest of the body of text. And so, but this makes sense. But it's a little bit to fit the form. I wouldn't necessarily phrase a term now in social justice, or those have connotations now. And I feel like I'm creative enough that when things have a connotation I don't like, I just imagine a new term. The idea about imagining a new political parties. Life is as beautiful as you can imagine. For the creative like us, we're not pigeonholed into terms that have bad taste in our mouth. They exist in different degrees in every activist, and in any one activist, the proportions will vary from time to time according to the atmosphere in which he is living. There are sheer egoism, desire to seem clever, to be talked about, to be remembered after death, to get your own back on grown-ups who snubbed you in childhood, etc., etc. It is bullshit to pretend that this is not a motive, and a strong one. Activists share this characteristic with scientists, artists, politicians, lawyers, soldiers, successful businessmen. In short, with the stale lot who derive esteem from identifying themselves as the top crust of humanity. The great mass of human beings are not acutely selfish, but there is also the minority of gifted, willful people who are determined to live their own lives to the end, and activists belong in this class. Serious activists, I should say, are on the whole more vain and self-centered than the villains they rail against, although less interested in money. Number 2, moral enthusiasm. Perception of injustice in the external world, or on the other hand, in ideals and their actualization. Pleasure in the impact of one person on another, in the firmness of good cause or the respect of a solution. Desire to share an idea which one feels is invaluable and ought not to be dismissed. The moral motive is very feeble in a lot of activism, but even a paid canvasser or call center operator will have pet words and phrases which appeal to him for idealistic reasons. Or he may feel strongly about single issues, democracy in action, etc. Above the level of forced conscription, no social activism is quite free from idealism. So this is when I'm talking about call centers, operators. I've spent most of my working life on the phone trying to sell stuff. So I'm drawing all this from my life. He had 4 different sections on why someone is a writer, and the first one was egoism, I think. So I'm borrowing his structure, but I'm using my own life experience. Historical impulse, desire to see things as they are, to find out true facts and store them up for the use of posterity. 4, political purpose, using the word political in the widest possible sense. Desire to push the world in a certain direction, to alter other people's ideas of the kind of society that they should strive for. No activist is generally free from political engagement. The opinion that activism should have nothing to do with politics is itself a political position. It can be seen how these various impulses must war against one another, and how they must fluctuate from person to person and from time to time. By nature, taking your nature to be the state you have attained when you are first self-aware, I'm a person in whom the first 3 motives would outweigh the 4th. In a peaceful age, I might have advocated superfluous or merely tangential causes, and might have remained almost unaware of political landscapes. As it is, I have been forced into becoming a sort of ideological taxonomist. First, I spent 2 years in an unsuitable profession, the United States Regular Army, military intelligence, where I underwent regimentation and the sense of conformity. This increased my natural hatred of authority and made me for the first time fully aware of the dictatorship of bureaucracy, as well as the character of the American soldier. That's why I think I'm pulling the bureaucracy ideas. I'm starting to articulate what is wrong with government. I'm seeing that whole Capitol visit really weighed a lot on my formative beliefs of if I'm developing a mature political system, just seeing it in action, seeing the sausage being made and the guys telling us, we rely so much on these lobbyists. Without their research, we wouldn't even be able to do our jobs. And yeah, the system this is how it works. It just, that's what, if you read Ben Rhodes' book, Obama didn't complain to him about his values or his ideals of being so cynical. He just one-upped him in cynicism and said, why'd you have to tell the people how the sausage is made? The American people don't have to know why how the sausage is made. They just need to support a policy. And we'll hire people to. I can't do an Obama. Sometimes I can. When I'm inspired, I can. Hire people to shove it down their throats. Shove it down their throats. That's like a George Bush, right? This increased my natural hatred of authority and made me for the first time fully aware of the dictatorship of bureaucracy as well as the character of the American soldier. But these experiences were not enough to give me a meaningful political orientation. Even as I rushed into our rec room on that fateful Tuesday morning, witnessing the second plane, I stood there as a soldier, yet I did not feel like one of the soldiers. After the military came stints in community college, state university, etc. 4 years into the occupation, I still had faith failed. 4 years into the occupation, so right here, that's how casually I just mentioned 9/11. Even as I rushed into our rec room on that fateful Tuesday morning, witnessing the second plane, I stood there as a soldier and yet did not feel like one of the soldiers. And I remember my mom got on the phone with me later on that morning, was like, oh my gosh, and we're like, what's going on? Are you going to war? And I'm like, I don't know, probably. And then she's like, I saw the devil, I saw the demon in the smoke, I saw the face of the devil. Her superstitious, putting her spirituality on to explain phenomena. And even then, I had the clarity of mind to say, well, it's not demonic. I pulled a Bill Maher, but that morning, that's how quickly I reacted to it with clarity of logic. I wasn't emotional. I was just like, those people, like Bill Maher said something like, you could call them whatever you want, but don't call them cowards. They give their life for what they believe. They're assholes or this and that. But the comedian, the writer, language means something. We're not defending them. We're defending the definition of words which we use to construct our reality. So we're defending reality. Existential threats used in order to attack reality is an attack on rationalism, which makes you more vulnerable. If you can't see that, then we can unpack it even slower and more logically. But it's pretty concise, and that's where people like Bill Maher, someone said that they're little Metternichs in those towers. There's power patterns and relationships going on. These aren't as clear cut as just terrorists attacked us, let's go attack a country where the terrorists don't even come from, but they look like them. Like, that's the logic that's being used to defend our actions. So like that morning I told my mom, I was like, I'm in the army to kill people. They're in their little army or whatever they are. Whoever it is who did that, who claimed that, they're doing what I'm doing, but from their side. I just recognize that, but at the same time, I had no idea about 9/11 Inside Job, 9/11 Truth. That was like 6 years later, 5 years later, I looked up online and looked at both sides and was like, it's probably controlled demolitions. And that's just look at the facts, and there's more facts on the controlled demolition side, what I believe as a rational person. Now, if you're going to challenge that belief, look at my life and look at how I've lived up to this point. There's a lot of people who live openly, transparently, rational lives, engineers who question the official narrative. But I'm smart enough, and I see how much bullshit is out there in the narratives where you don't want to speculate too much past the investigation was faulted, because that's provable. And the 9/11 victims' families, which is an emotional thing, they wanted a new investigation. So the people they put on the investigation to investigate it, some of them weren't qualified openly. Ben Rhodes was on the investigation. Why? They wanted Kissinger on the investigation, who fucking consults with murderous regimes all around the world and makes his money off of fucking global instability. So they wanted insiders on the investigation. So it was faulted from the beginning. We just start there, and then just pull a Mueller, do a real investigation. But and then everything will come out in time, hopefully. But now the people who would argue that are the people who would argue against an open investigation. Let them defend themselves, and that's a little more subtle strategy and a little bit more defensible than me saying now my opinion, looking at something, I'm allowed to say it looked like controlled demolitions. It looked like controlled demolitions. I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying that there's enough question marks about how the investigation was conducted that we need a new investigation. Anyone who argues with that is being irrational. And that's as simple as it has to be. You don't have to go to Building 7. You don't have to go to whatever hit the Pentagon that we still don't have the videotapes. These are all just opinions. But who wouldn't want an investigation, open investigation, to clear it up? Especially since we have this perpetual war that we based off of it. So anyone who is against that open investigation, and let's question those people instead of, now you're not on the defensive. As a rhetorical way to claim the higher ground, which requires control, self-control. Because when people hit your emotional buttons or attack you personally or bait you into defending why you think it's an inside job, or they meme it into non-meaning, 9/11 dink memes, can't melt steel beams, whatever, we're losing sight of objective reality. Is we never really had a fair, open, transparent investigation. They destroyed evidence. They got the people who should have been questioning out of the country. The Saudi family, there's all these flights, no one was flying that day except for the Saudi family out of the country. There's a lot of questions that an open and transparent investigation would solve. And then read the 9/11 Commission report, and then read omissions and distortions, the refutation of the 9/11 Commission report. That's where we start. But anyways, we'll see. A person can dream. So 4 years into the occupation, I had still failed occupation of Iraq. I still failed to establish a firm philosophy. Around this time, I adapted a poem from Ernest Hemingway, trying to synthesize my thoughts. March 19th, 2003, NYC, NY. They say it's over now. The need now is for justice, not for militarism, for humanity. We must be full of grace, or on the way there. Civilization must lead to something. Morally instructive, dull, but stemming from universal rights, which mostly dealt, if I remember, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of property and enterprise. My Constitution, Jefferson, where has it got to? But we, who have created wealthy men, have financed foreign wars, buried our partners, buried our founders when these did humble themselves for philanthropic reasons, an American gesture to assuage senility within the endowment or social program, who know our labor for bitches. We who have utilized the desperate in different countries and experienced great profit, have destroyed environments, settled claims, invested and borne returns, who have instigated revolutions, counter-revolutions, and counter-counter-revolutions, who have seen many systems of government, many a good venture fail, who have been at the Docklands, in Tokyo, in Chicago, and in Wall Street during the rally there. I speak figuratively. Who have seen assets deflated in Asia's centers and cast into the red, who have developed other countries as well as our own, have spoken and understood the language of progress, and have answered the call to modernity. We have something that cannot be taken away from us by an article, nor abolished by a critical agreement of the United Nations. The searchers for justice will find that there is a certain humanity in the acceptance of profits. They may, that is, they rarely find out anything they cannot read in Marx or Chomsky. We'll start the wars. They will not fight them, but the children may, if they have children. So I was trying to put my citizen's audit experience in here, my autobiographical, like what are you doing with your life, Shaz? Not even changing my name legally to Shaz yet. And then now I'm putting my poems that I just wrote the last couple years. So I'm recognizing that I went to New York, got that girlfriend, but that was all a reaction. And now I'm back to that thing I was doing before New York, before the DUI, before the submitting to New Yorker and them telling me that you're no good. I was like, you know what? I am good. The people, like I'm connecting to something out there. My insight is being verified from the people in the California in the street who are Democrat, Republican, whatever. Everyone's connecting with these conversations we're having. We're getting more and more insight. And we didn't start with an opinion. We started with just you can't fail at democracy. And then as we started talking to people, we started realizing, yeah, it's pretty fucking obvious bullshit. Why aren't we're being distracted from the truth that's self-evident right in front of us. And then we go to the Capitol and we realize the disconnect between the politicians because the lobbyists are feeding them a fucking artificial reality. And so now I have enough confidence. I have that fuck you love, and I have the political insights. Then I'm back in it. But I guess that's what it takes. The world tells you no, and you're like, all right, maybe no. But the honest explorer explores other avenues, and then you come back to that same fucking door, and you start climbing that same fucking mountain again. I guess that's what you call your passion, is that you try to push it away and you try to, like what I'm doing this year. It's like I did 5 or 6 years in real estate, and then I just fucking circled back around, I guess, huh? Which now I've just consigned myself to. Just I have to do this now because this apparently is who I am. So I found inspiration. Like when people say, "Why are you doing this?" I've tried everything else. I found inspiration in the world wars and other events of the earlier half of the 20th century, when passionate men seemed to know where they stood. Every person, I'm talking about Jack London, I just read, every person of serious intellect that I've read of that age took a stand, directly or indirectly, against war and for pacifism, as I understand it. It seems to me nonsense in a period like our own to think that taking positions on such subjects as Democrat or Republican are idealistic actions. Both parties promote war. It is simply a question of which side one trusts more or distrusts less. And the more one is conscious of one's political bias, the more chance one has of acting politically without sacrificing one's humanity and intellectual integrity. What I have most wanted to do since leaving high school 10 years ago is to live my ideals. My starting point was a feeling of partisanship, a sense of duty. When I sat down in MEPS, I did not say to myself, I'm going into the Army to secure a signing bonus and gain a language skill. That's what they told me, though. I was assigned my MOS because of my ASVAB score, and later my DLAB score, and the enthusiasm of my recruiter. But I could no longer do the work of a good soldier, or even a poor soldier, without moral justification. I think I'm rationalizing a little bit here. I actually was like a bit of a just fucking around and getting some life experience too. Like when I say intuitively I didn't like the military, I think there's something to that. But I also got into a lot of trouble, which was just me learning how to be on my own in life. The drinking, the partying, the having a house off base, and just there's a bunch of other stories in my time there. Anyone who cares to examine the history of the United States will see that even when it is downright propaganda, it contains much that a rational human being would consider barbarous. I'm not able and do not want completely to abandon the worldview that I acquired in childhood. So long as I remain alive and well, I shall continue to feel strongly about peacemaking, to love the people of the earth, and to take pleasure in human interaction and the creation of something beautiful. It is no use trying to suppress that rebellious side of myself. The job is to reconcile my ingrained compassion with the essentially aggressive, warmongering activities that this age forces on all of us. It is not easy. It raises problems of organization and of action, and it raises in a new way the solution of peace. Let me give just one example of the cruder kind of difficulty that arises. Our occupation of Iraq, 8 years on, is of course frankly an imperial act. But in the main, it is described with a certain detachment and regard for humanity. Imperialism, a noun, a policy of extending a nation's authority by territorial acquisition or by the establishment of economic and political hegemony over other nations. Good people do try very hard to tell the whole truth without violating their humanist instincts. But among other things, they are contained within a large war machine full of narratives and incentive structures, defending empire when its justification might fall into doubt. Clearly such a system, which after a generation or two would create its own internal logic, must ruin the independent mind. So I'm on the cultural tip back here. I forgot about this. But yeah, all of these ideas have been going around my head for a while. An American leader who was much respected illustrated this phenomena. What kind of peace do we seek? He asked his young audience at American University. Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Genuine peace. That's JFK. After this, I have all these speeches I put to music to remind myself of this hard-earned wisdom, knowing that I just given up possibly the love of my life. I'd just done that California tour. I might not be coming back to this well anytime soon after I put this political side down, which I was starting to acknowledge I have these cycles of very politically active and then check my blind spots. Am I being a weirdo? Am I not becoming a well-developed human being? So then right after this, I put some speeches I wanted to remember the wisdom of to music that we're going to talk about. His words may very well have been sincere, but his actions could not have been more opposed to this principle. We all now know what very few people in the cultural mainstream are allowed to say, that we committed genocide against the people of Vietnam. If we cannot openly be ashamed about this, the good people of Iraq should never allow themselves hope. In one form or another, this problem of empire comes up again. The problem of human nature is subtler and would take too long to discuss. I will only say that with the latest research we have discovered that man is inherently an empathic, mimetic creature. In every case, one is born a dependent and therefore cooperative animal. You have always to learn war. Iraq was the first war in which a global pacifist movement was aroused, with full consciousness of the crimes against humanity about to be committed, to fuse political purpose and peaceful purpose into one whole. I stood alone on a downtown corner in my hometown, but I stood with the prescience of the world. War is bound to be a failure. Every war is a failure of the human spirit. But we know with much clarity war is profitable, and therefore a success for the few. Looking back through the last page or two, I see that I have made it appear as though my motives in activism were wholly idealistic. I don't want to leave that as a final impression. All leaders are vain, selfish, and lazy, and at the very bottom of their motives, there lies a mystery. Pacifism is a horrible reductive argument, like a far-off fantasy in some fictional work. One would never promote such a thing if one were not driven on by some angel whom one can neither resist nor understand. For all one knows, that angel is simply the same unreason that makes a man fall in love. And yet it is also true that society cannot evolve unless it lays claim to its heart. The good pacifist is like a defibrillator. I cannot say with certainty from where I derive my moral authority, but I know that I am right, because I know that I am leading with my heart. And looking forward at the work to be done, I predict that it will be when we finally conquer our compassion that we will become a lifeless society and will betray our humanity, condemning our children to the rotted fruits of our failed imaginations. So I really like this language, even though it's like his tone. I really like that metaphor. Looking forward at the work to be done, I predict it will be when we finally conquer our compassion that we become a lifeless society. When we finally have no remorse for the genocide in Vietnam and no recognition for the victims of our wars of aggression. That's going to be a shitty world to live in. Right now, there are troops marching and protesting against these foreign wars. When they did it against Vietnam, they were dragged into the streets and beat. The troops were. So the troops who protested against Vietnam were beat just like the hippie protesters. So we've evolved as a nation since then. Violence isn't as bullshit, but instead now our objective reality is being attacked. So which is worse? Would you rather people crack you over the skulls, but people knew more what objectively was going on? Or would you rather have this the realist? Look at this. This is something that I wanted to talk about, but I haven't yet. This is a magazine from March 1965. As I get into media, I wanted to read about stuff from way back when. 2 years after JFK was assassinated in 1963, 1965. And they have this whole article about the war and how everyone knows it's bullshit. It's objective reality. People knew it was bullshit. You didn't have to investigate it too much to know this is all bullshit. The Gulf of Tonkin, and now we have to go in there? I want to look up that Lansdale was a spy. There's some CIA shit. There's reasons. All of our early advisors, the advisors we put in countries before we can actually commit troops, are special forces and intelligence operations. Anyways, the founder and the follower, patriotism and the American conscience, part 1, America, Your America. We might have to do another video. As I write, highly patriotic military drones encircle the world to protect me. They do not feel any love for me as an individual, nor I for them. They are only doing their duty, as the saying goes. You know, Barack Obama received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on nuclear non-proliferation, and he also instigated a drone arms race for his putting into law that America has a right to kill anyone, anywhere in the world, at our will, without bringing him to trial extrajudiciously. So Barack Obama receives a Nobel Peace Prize for getting rid of the old weapons while he instigates a new arms race with the same amorality. Yeah, we can kill anyone on sight, and it's stealth. So which is worse again? The person who cracks your head over anti-war protest openly, or the person who manipulates your sense of reality to cover up their inhumanity and their warmongering? Obama pushed for the warfare to stay out of the news by being more drone and airstrikes, and then also he prosecuted more leaks, and he was harder on the journalists than any administration, maybe even more so than the Trump administration. I don't want to say that guy's name. More than the administration, because these guys are too stupid to not trip over their own 2 feet, right? I made a bet with Mama G, my mom. I was like, that guy's going to jail. Pretty sure he's going to jail. Just reading history, it looks like he's probably going to be going to jail. And so we shook on it. We'll see what happens. So that's the only reason there's so many more bigger things to talk about than that dude. But if he does get his comeuppance, not that you want to see anyone have to go away to prison and stuff, I'd win a bet with my folks. And that'd go a long way. It would go a long way at the kitchen table. They do not feel any love for me as an individual, nor I for them. They are only doing their duty, as the saying goes, the drones. Many of them, I have no doubt, are young men who role-play committing murder in virtual life. On the other hand, if one of them succeeds in killing the enemy with a well-placed round, he will likely sleep worse for it. He is serving his country, but it does not have the power to absolve him from his conscience. One cannot see the modern state as it is unless one recognizes the overwhelming strength of compassion, universal brotherhood. In certain circumstances it can break down. At certain levels of animosity it does not exist. But as a positive force, there is nothing to be set beside it. State dogma and economic ideologies are as weak as straw in comparison with it. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mohandas Gandhi earned followings in their own countries, very largely because they could grasp this fact, and their states could not. Also, one must admit that the divisions between nation and nation are founded on artificial differences of outlook. Till recently, it was thought proper to pretend that all human beings are very much different, but in fact, anyone able to use his eyes knows that the average of human behavior is quite similar from country to country. Things that could happen in one country could very well happen in another. King's economic boycotts, for instance, could have happened in Gandhi's India. And as world populations go, Americans are very highly homogenized. There's a sort of paradoxical denial of this in the admiration which nearly all school children are instilled with for cultural diversity. I guess I'm on that divide and conquer kick. I'm starting to recognize that identity politics is playing a role in this. Most immigrants can endure living in America, and even Americans often feel at home abroad. When you leave America to visit any other foreign country, you have immediately the sensation of living in a shared world. Even in the first few minutes, dozens of small things conspire to give you this feeling. The crowds in the big towns, with their mild, important faces, their congestion and congeniality, are similar across the globe. Then the common bonds of humanity swallow you up, and you earn for a while the insight that the whole world has a single identifiable character. Are there really such things as nations? Are we not 7 billion human beings all related? And the commonality of protests, the similarities, the civil disobedience of curfews in the Cairo streets, the barricading of government employees in the Greek Acropolis, the protests outside of stock exchanges, the rabble of Iraq. See, this is right before Occupy Wall Street, I was calling this. The rabble of Iraqis at the Green Zone gates, the growing dissatisfaction with the old order on the left and the right in America. All these are not fragments, but common characteristics of a humanity in revolt. How can one make a division out of this pattern? This is very topical for when I go back and write about my Occupy stuff. But talk to patriots, read jingoist books or newspapers, and you are brought back to the same prideful thought. Yes, there is something similar and recognizable in all of civilization. It is a desire to be as free as an American on football Sundays, middle class and entertained, democracy and consumer choice. It has a logic of its own. Moreover, it is illusionary. It turns civilization into a mere equation of production and consumption. There is something in it that is mendacious, as in a devil's gift. What can the American of $50,000 median income have in common with a Ghanaian of 1,500? But then, what has billionaire author J.K. Rowling in common with the Edinburgh woman on welfare who was so impoverished that she contemplated suicide? That was J.K. Rowling before she broke with Harry Potter, was considering suicide and she was on welfare. Nothing, except she happens to be the same person. I didn't know I did the reveal. And above all, it is one civilization. It is us. However much you hate poverty or laugh at failure, you will never be the differentiated lifestyle you purchase. The electronic gadgets and the fast cars cannot divorce you from humanity. Compassionately or callously, you take part in the human struggle. It's part of you. And this side the grave, you will never get away from the transgressions recorded against your fellow man. Meanwhile, the world, and America with it, is changing, and like everything else, it can change in infinite directions, which at any point can be influenced. That is not to say that the future is unknowable, merely that every alternative is possible and imagination is endless. A seed of thought may grow or not grow, but at any rate, inspiration never comes fully formed. It is therefore the deepest importance to try and dream of what the world can be before guessing what part America should play in the huge events that are happening. Cultural myths are not easy to pin down, and when pinned down, they are often turn out to be trivialities or seem to have no connection with injustice. Columbus setting out to prove the earth was round, the Mayflower and its pilgrims making haste from Babylon, the canonization of the founding fathers. Obviously, such things don't seem important in themselves. Nevertheless, nothing is causeless, and even the fact that cultures embrace mythology can tell something about their current ability to embrace reality. So I'm talking about reality even back then. Here are a couple generalizations about the world that would be accepted by almost all Americans. One is that the world is not gifted physically. There are not enough resources as the human species requires. Scarcity and abject poverty can never be eradicated in America, let alone the rest of the world. Another is, as nationalities go, the American is exceptional. They have a horror of global egalitarian thought. They have a horror of global egalitarian thought. They feel a compulsion for never-ending competition in a world market. Nor is this because they are capitalist, as they are so fond of claiming for themselves. One has only to look at their methods of economic planning and corporate welfare, their obstinate clinging to an economic imperialism that is out of date and a human travesty, a financial sector that defies analysis, and a system of cronyism and corruption that is transparent only to the insider, to see how little they care about mere theories of real economies. But they have a certain power of acting without revealing intent. Their world-famed plausible deniability, their double-faced attitude toward the empire, for instance, is bound up with this. Cognitive dissonance. I was thinking of a word yesterday. It was cognitive dissonance. Also, if provided with the opportune moments of supreme crisis, the whole nation can suddenly draw together and act upon a species of manufactured instinct, really a programmed code of behavior, which is understood by almost everyone, though never formulated. The phrase that George Bush coined after September 11th, a war on terror, would apply the filter to perceive supreme crisis almost anywhere in perpetuity. Note the impossibility of waging, let alone winning, a war on a noun, much less an emotion, which is arguably the most common byproduct of modern warfare. There is nothing more terrifying in the current age than being on the receiving end of American firepower. But here it is worth noting that a minor American trait, which is extremely well marked, though not often commented on, and that is a plasticity of national character. This is one of the first things that one notices when one observes American culture, especially if one observes trends. Does it fully explain the American indifference to its political reality? Perhaps, because ritualistic acts have become substitutes for the political. What it does not account for, however, is another American characteristic which is so much a part of us that we barely notice it, and that is the domestication, the passivity of current American citizens. We are a nation of conformists, but also a nation of progressively strike-broken, war-robbed, regressively taxed, conglomerated, factually deceived, emasculated citizens generation upon generation. All of the political topics that are most often discussed center around tangential issues, which, even when they are relevant, are not economically or historically contextualized. Immigration, war, civil liberties, decisions made by the benevolent technocrat. So I'm including a lot of, this is summarizing a lot of political beliefs that even now help articulate some things that are going around in my mind, like framing war in the context of a regressive tax, which the poor may pay more than the rich, is a really good way to market peace. So this was a serious, I should probably finish this project, but this was a serious defense of peace. It was a silly syntactical interpretation, but I was on getting some good stuff out of it. But that's a really good framing of the issue, is people hate taxation, especially the right. And so if you want to go after those war hawks, you just point out how robbing the treasury in order to pay for the war and put it into private hands is a way of taxing the commons. So it's a regressive tax. The poor and the heartland pay for these wars of aggression and don't reap the benefits. Your oil is not cheaper because we went into Iraq. It's just more, Halliburton made a lot of money. We all know this. It was all played out in the news. And the only reason we're not mad about it is because now we're mad about the next thing. The liberty, even though this one's still going on. I have a cousin who's in Qatar right now. The liberty of the individual is still believed in, almost as in the enlightenment of the founding fathers. But this has nothing to do with the democratic reality, then or now, the right of common citizens to actively participate in meaningful self-governance. It is the obscuring of compulsion in the American system, the illusion to vote for whom you like in your elections, to form your own opinions instead of having them formed for you, that keeps the common citizen from condemning his government as authoritarian. The most hateful of all concepts to self-serving bureaucracies is democracy. It is obvious, of course, that this reality is under constant threat of exposure. Like all compulsive systems, American citizenship requires processes of being numbered, labeled, conscripted, indoctrinated. But the narratives of their cultural myths are in the other direction, and the degree of American malleability will be modified in consequence. Low party identification, youth antipathy, democratic deficits, ballot boycotts, euphemized as low voter turnout, demonstrate the collision of mythic independent national character with a reality that demands conformity. No forced conscription either, since the Vietnam fiasco. So I'm going to just consign myself to another video. We'll do like 20 more minutes. I won't. The first one was 40 minutes. Maybe I could have fit this into 2 videos. I didn't realize I wrote so much. Well, this is why I'm doing this project. This is a diamond hidden in the breadcrumbs. Now, reading what I've read now and been through Occupy Wall Street and other stuff, I still really like the way I articulated some of this stuff. So this is going to either get into current projects or be finished on its own. But that is exactly where I'm at right now, that America is a compulsive system. And what did I say here that I really liked? I feel egotistical. Why I'm right. If I stand up and say why I'm right, I'm inviting criticism of egoism. So I must have felt like I had something, and I did. That's what it is. When someone acts cocky, they're either a dumbass or they're sitting on something pretty good. I was sitting on something pretty good here. The passivity of American citizenship, plasticity of national character, our cultural trends, divorce from political realities. That was my big thing back then. I was really, after all that experience, and I was realizing that's what it is. This came out of that going through California, doing that citizens audit. I'm running for governor, and maybe that's why I'm running for president now. You get so much valuable wisdom and ability to articulate your thoughts when you take your theory and take what you've been reading and what you've been figuring out on your own and then apply it to the real world. And that collision between your theory and humility as the broker between your theory and reality, what's actually happened to people out there, you get really good shit. This is the product of that. The writing about the citizens audit was pretty good, but I think this is the fruit of that trip. These beliefs take actual life experience to articulate and then that syntax. I guess what I hope now is that I've lived enough and practiced enough in writing and have enough confidence. I've worked out enough insecurities that I can write this well without the syntax of Orwell. We will see. But first we have to finish this video.